Hi there, so today we're going to be sewing the Relaxed Fit V-necked camisole. This is a woven garment, so our seam allowances are 1 centimetre, which is 3/8 of an inch, and our bag out seam allowances are 6 mil, which is 1/4 of an inch, but I'll explain this to you as we go through the sew along video. So in addition to needing the main pattern pieces, you're going to need some sort of bias tape. I've gone ahead and just cut bias tape out of my main fabric, which you can do as well if you want, and I have made this pattern to have adjustable straps, so you can buy strap adjusters, or if you don't want to, just make your straps a little longer so that you can try on the garment and then adjust the strap size to suit. Either way will work, it's really up to you. So when you're ready, make sure your sewing machine tension is balanced. In addition to this, you can thread up your overlocker with 3 threads of matching colour. So it doesn't matter with the upper looper whether you use the left needle or the right needle, entirely up to you, but we only really need 3 threads. You can of course use 4 if you want, or even better if you have a 5-thread machine, you can stitch and overlock this all in one. So I'm going to assume you only have access to a plain stitch sewing machine and an overlocker. But of course you could always zigzag these edges if you prefer. So when you're ready, let's get started. So the fabric I'm working with today is a linen cotton blend. I'm going to see whether this fabric, this design will work in this fabric. I've certainly made this in polyesters, very light flowy ones, and it works beautifully, but we'll soon see how it goes in a firmer fabric. So we're going to start working with the facing. So take the front facing and we're going to place this right sides together with the back facing. So how do we know which is the upper side of the back piece? Well, right in the middle you'll see double notches, so that shows us that this is the upper edge. So what we're going to do is place these together at the side seams, and at the side seams we're going to sew a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and 1 centimetre is 3/8 of an inch, and remember to back tack when you sew this. And when you've done one side, go ahead and do the other side as well. Right, pop that aside somewhere safe. We're going to overlock, tidy up the edges in a moment, and take your front piece and place it right side up, and your back piece and right side down. So we have right sides together, and same thing, you'll see double notches and that will show us the upper edge. So match the side seams and sew that at 1 centimetre, which is 3/8 of an inch. Now as we come up the side seam, you'll see a notch that we're going to match. Now that notch is going to help us not only sew the side seam in the correct position, it's going to show us the position that our facing will sit in. So sew the other side seam. Right, so now we're going to zip across to our overlocker and secure these edges we've just sewn. So let's start with our facing piece. We need to overlock and secure each of the side seams. And if you'll notice for this, I'm stitching right on the edge, so I'm using my overlocker just to secure the side seams. We're not actually cutting any fabric off. And then go ahead and do that on the other side. And now what we're going to do is overlock secure the edge of the lower facing. So start somewhere near a side seam, make sure that seam faces towards the back, and just overlock on the raw edge. And then take your main body piece and do the same thing to the side seams. And now while you're on the job, overlock around the hemline. Make sure that that side seam is facing towards the back. So once you've finished overlocking the lower edge of the garment, we're going to go back to our sewing machine and sew the centre front V part. So here is the main part of my garment. I've got my garment inside out, so it's right side inside, and here is the centre of the V here. So what you need to do now is we need to place the facing inside this so that we have right sides together, and we're going to match the V parts. So what we're going to do shortly is we'll match the side seams there, which I'll just pop a pin in it to keep it out of the way for the time being. Match the other side seam there. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew from the upper edge here down to the V. We're going to stop, turn and pivot, and then sew up to the other side. Now this has a 6mm, which is 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. That's because it's what's called a bag out. So when you're ready, and you can see the top part here is flat, so our strap is actually going to sit in here very shortly. Don't forget to back tack when you begin and end the seam, and don't stretch it out as you sew. Now, the softer the fabric you're working with, so if you're working with 100% polyester or a chiffon, polyester, silk, cotton, anything like that, the harder this will be to sew, the firmer the fabric, the easier it is to sew, but of course the silkier the fabric, the better the finished result will look, because this is a really good pattern for really slinky, soft wovens. Right, so when you're ready, back tack to begin. Okay, so we're going to stop with our needle down in our work. We're going to lift our presser foot, turn and pivot, and that will just help give us a nice sharp V. So just match the other end of your work, and we'll just stitch up to the other side. Make sure you back tack here before you cut off. So the next thing we need to do here is create a pin stitch, and that will help the centre front roll towards the inside. Some people call it understitching. It's actually an edge stitch, but in industry it's called a pin stitch. So the first thing, to get a nice sharp point of your V, take your thread snips or some scissors and be very, very careful. What we're going to do is just snip down towards where we stopped with the needle in our fabric and did a pivot, but you need to keep at least 3mm, 1/8 of an inch away, because what you will find is this fabric will start to shred as you get closer to it. So don't stitch right into the stitching, do not cut the stitching, keep about 1/8 of an inch, 3mm away from it when you snip. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to do the top stitching, which is the pin stitching, which people call an edge stitch or a understitch, from the right side of our garment. So this is my facing on this side, and this is the body of my garment on this side. So when we do this pin stitch, we want to make sure the seam we've just sewed faces towards the inside, and we're going to be stitching through all this layer here on the facing side of our garment. So open this up and just make sure the bulk of that seam is on the back, and we're going to pin stitch this. So pin stitch is just in from the edge, and it's called pin stitch because literally it's a pin width. It's probably 1/16 of an inch away from the edge. I'm just going to use the edge of my presser foot to guide me, and there's no need to back tack this. And this just creates that roll to the inside. So go nice and slowly towards your V. Now keep an eye out for where the V is. We want to stop, I'm going to say about 1 centimetre, so 1/2 inch away from the V, and back tack. You can get as close as you want, but generally that's a pretty good place to stop, 3/8 of an inch, something like that. Okay, so just keep an eye on how far away you stopped there, and whatever the distance you stopped from the V there is the distance we want to stop from the V on the other side. So rearrange your work. We're going to sew from the strap position again, and now we've got the work with, this is the back, this is the facing, sorry, and this is the front of our garment. So same thing again, push all that bulk towards the facing edge. We're going to start and pin stitch down. Find that V and stop the same distance you stopped before on the other side, and back tack. So now it's a really good idea to go to your iron and press this into place. So this is the back, sorry, the inside of my garment. You can see here that that's naturally starting to roll here, and because we did that teeny snip in, we haven't got any pulling around the center front of the V. So you can either use your fingers to finger press that into place, or just go and press that down with your iron. Right, so come back to your machine and place that facing so it's all right sides together again. We're going to complete the upper edge of our garment. So to do this, we need to match the side seams, make sure they're going to be sewn directly on top of each other. At the centre back you'll see a double notch, that position needs to match, and the other side seam as well. Oh, I've gone off a little bit with my overlocking, I'll fix that up shortly, sorry about that. And of course then we are going to be sewing from up here at the strap edge. So the next thing we need to do is find our strap. Now I've created 2 straps with self fabric, so I've created my own bias, and what this is going to be done is it's just going to sit in here, and when we sew that we'll be sewing across the top and then down the side, and this seam as well is 6mm, which is 1/4 inch. So we're going to go across at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and down the side as 6mm. Okay, so take your strap adjusters, and these are the ones I use. I like to use them with the extra hook in. I just find it easier to iron the garments later, but it's entirely up to you. And we're going to need 2 pieces of tape cut at 5 centimetres, which is 2 inches. So I'll just cut one, and cut a second one to match. Right. So on your pattern, in addition to the double notches in the centre, you'll also have a notch here, and this will show you the position to place the back strap adjusters. So just move that out to the side. What we need to do is take one of these, place the loop through the centre, and I always find it easier just to run a very small tacking stitch across the top to hold those in place. So make sure you sew that like that, and do the same thing to the other one. Right, so now we want to place them with, if you're like me and you've stitched on one side only, I just like placing them opposite, so I've got one with the stitching on the outside of each of them. Won't really matter, but I like to do that. So we need to sandwich these in between the layers. So just flip your garment over, find the notch for one of the strap adjusters, place that inside the 2 layers, and tack stitch that down. And it's really just to add another layer of security and help us when we sew. Now come to the other position, just slide that in there, oops, and hold that into place. Now this will actually help make your garment more secure, so if you want to back tack a couple of times. So when we're finished, that's going to look like that on the back of our garment. I'm going to come back to this area here, and I'm going to place my strap inside. Now you can either, if you've cut them to length, that's great, or if they're longer you can worry about it later. So just sandwich that in there, and we want the top of that to be sitting nice and square with the raw edge of our garment, like that. And we're going to be sewing across at 1 centimetre, and remember to back tack. Now it's a good idea to stitch this backwards and forwards a couple of times just to make it extra strong, and then stop with the needle down in your work, lift, turn and pivot, and we're going to stitch this underarm area. Now when you do, make sure you keep that strap well out of the way, and what we're going to stitch now is 6mm, 1/4 inch. Now make sure this is nice and secure when you go through here, and it's always a good idea to do another back tack like that. Make sure your double notches match when you come to the centre back. And as we come through the next side seam, get your strap ready to place inside these layers here. So take your other strap and sandwich that in the middle there. So we want the top of the strap to be there, and I'm just going to make sure I don't sew it into the seam as I go, and I'm just popping it sort of straight up and down there. So just put that in there. Okay, and then continue sewing. And then stop 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch from the top, lift, turn and pivot, and sew straight across. And back tack. Okay, so I'm just going to tidy that up a teeny bit. Right, so let's just turn this through and see how that's come out. Yes, so that looks fine. So that's what we want the top of our strap to look like. And clearly both sides aren't caught, so that's fine. Okay. Oh, and the other thing is when I sewed them, also I made sure that my stitching line was opposite, so the stitching line's on the inside here and the inside there. It's not really that important, but that's just the little details sometimes are quite nice. Alright, so now it's a good idea to do some more pin stitching on the back facing. So what I'm going to do is come around to the side seam on the right hand side as if you're wearing it. I'd like to start from quite close up by the strap. So generally when I'm pin stitching something like this, I'll probably leave it maybe an inch and a half. So I don't know, 3.5, 4 centimeters from the top there. And I'm going to push all of the bulk of that fabric towards the back, sorry, towards the facing side, which is, I'm calling it the back. I mean the back of the, I don't mean the back of the garment, I sort of mean the inside. So we want to pin stitch on this facing side with all the bulk on that side, and sometimes you're just limited to how close you can get to that strap, and that's fine. And this is just another way of helping this roll. So I'm just going to squish all that in there and do exactly what we did to pin stitch before. Just a couple of stitches to start that off and back tack. And then just making sure with my fingers that I have all the bulk of that fabric towards the facing side and that we're stitching on the facing side. Okay, so as you can tell there's a couple of just stray threads. I'll tidy these up as I go. The same thing, just make sure that you back tack when you finish and make sure the distance on each side is the same. Right, so now what we need to do is we're going to hold the side seams into place. So all I'm going to do, well, let's just show you what we need to do. If you try and wear this just as it is, which is completely fine, obviously we still have the hem to go, what can happen is the facing can push up. So what we can do now is just tack stitch the facing into the seam here. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. I always find the easiest one to do is just to come and make sure that your roll is to the inside. And as you come down the side there will be a notch at the side seam here. You should be able to see it through your overlocking, and that shows us the position of where the bottom of the facing is going to sit. But alternatively what you can do is just hold this like this nice and flat, and then just run a tack stitch holding those layers of overlocking together. So you can either sew it there on the overlocking or sew it close to the stitch line, whatever you prefer. I'm just going to go and do a couple of stitches. It's not going to be seen, so I'm not too worried about it. As you can tell here, see, it's all nice and hidden, and when you wear it that'll just help that sit down. Do that on that side, and whatever you do on one side, we'll just make sure that we do on the other side. Hold that down and then stitch it together And you could stitch right the way from the top to the bottom if you wanted, the bottom to the top, entirely up to you. You can back tack if you want to, it's probably a good idea to. It's just a stitch to hold that down. Alright, so we're nearly finished. What we need to do now is finish the straps off, but because I feel like doing something different, I'm just going to jump ahead and do the hem. So our hem we previously overlocked. If you wanted to, of course, you could do a 5mm double turn, which is 1/4 of an inch, so you'd be going like this and like that. If your fabric's really fine, that's a really nice finish. This is patterned for 1 centimetre, which is 3/8 of an inch. So I will start on a side seam and just stitch around this at 1 centimetre. And it's a good idea to press this with your iron if you don't have really good thread guides, or sometimes it just gives a nicer finish just to press with your iron anyway. Certainly when this garment is finished, it's a good idea to give it a really good press. And what we're looking for when we do the hem is that the hem is nice and even all the way around, and that our side seams are pressed towards the back. Right, so now let's jump over and finish these straps off. So with regards to the tape, it's a really good idea to remeasure this. I've allowed 41 centimetres, which is 16 inches. So that's 16 inches from the join here. So all we need to do is take our tape measure and trim our strap back. Certainly if you've made your own bias tape, you will need to be adjusting this. So just make sure that they're both the same length. Once you have trimmed them, just double check that they're the same length by matching them together. Right, okay. So now it's time to put our strap adjusters in. Now this is a bulkier fabric than I normally use with a strap adjuster, so it'll be interesting to see how this goes. Right, so I'm going to place this through my loop. Through here. Coming back on itself, and this will be the tricky part to see whether it will squish through or not. Okay, so when you have that through, we're just going to turn up the end. I'll just tidy that end up a little bit. Just going to turn the end up, and then that will stitch to the back part there. So you want to leave an inch here, which is 2.5 centimetres, and then stitch through there. Now this fabric's fraying a bit, so I'll just tidy that up at the end. We're just going to stitch across and back tack a couple of times to hold that secure. So I'll just go ahead and tidy up this fraying. So that's what we want our strap adjuster to look like. Now go ahead and repeat that on the other side.